Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Amy Jo Dowd, and I am presenting with colleagues Lauren Pisani, Caroline Dusabe, and Holly Jane Howell. We all work with Save the Children as technical advisors on research and programming across the globe. As such, we have been engaged with efforts to enhance parent and caregiver supports for learning and to investigate the impact and equity of these efforts. And so for that reason, we're excited to share with you today the key messages of the third think piece entitled Leveraging the Enthusiasm of Parents and Caregivers for Life-Wide Learning. We'll organize our presentation as follows. First, we'll define life-wide learning and review how current global priorities are framing learning as beyond what happens in schools. Then we'll look at how that reshapes opportunity to learn and has a particularly transformative impact on the role of parents and caregivers. Then we'll turn to a review of experience and evidence in the region by age group, early childhood, middle childhood, and early adolescence, to consider strategies and their potential for impact. In closing, we'll point to how these strategies can be integrated into your policy and investment planning efforts and have a look at potential partners before we open up for questions and discussion. To begin, we want to define life-wide learning. This is a term we coined in 2012 when reflecting for the Global Thematic Consultation on Addressing Inequalities. The consultation was led by UN Women and UNICEF and was part of the post-2015 development agenda and future we want for all. So often when we think of learning, we think of schools. But learning also happens beyond school walls in our villages and towns, as well as in institutions beyond our homes, be they religious, medical, athletic, or economic. So lifeline learning is children's engagement in enjoyable, cognitively demanding activities, not only in school, but also in their homes and communities. And it is worth pointing out that this is true not only in context of development, but also in crisis, conflict, and refugee settings. Life-wide learning is increasingly acknowledged in multilateral statements. For example, the World Bank Education Strategy 2020 notes that the driver of development will ultimately be what individuals learn, both in and out of school, from preschool through the labor market. And similarly, UNICEF's 2016 State of the World's Children notes that education is not just about getting through school, but learning is what counts. So to make concrete how this shift alters the calculus around opportunity to learn, consider a primary school child in Malawi who spends about 4 hours a day during 8 months of a year in the classroom. Doing the math, the child winds up with 640 hours of schooling a year. But school effectiveness research indicates that the teacher is not there a quarter of that time. And during another 28% of that time, the teacher is not on task supporting learning. So actually the child winds up with 300 hours of opportunity to learn in school across the year. Now consider how many education programs and policies prioritize this 24% of time that a child spends in school. Investments aim to reduce wastage in the 6% of time the teacher is not present, decrease the 7% of time teachers are not on task, or raise the quality of the 11% of time teachers are on task. And these are very worthwhile investments. But as the figure shows, the opportunity to learn outside of school represents much more potential time. Because in contrast, that same child with 4 hours a day in school, say they spend 10 hours sleeping, 4 hours on work, play, athletic, or market activities, they then have 6 remaining hours of potential learning time, resulting in 2,160 hours of opportunity to learn a year. So if our goal is to stimulate greater learning in children across the region, then we'd better pay some attention to what parents and caregivers and children are up to in this great amount of time and strategize about how to support them to optimize children's learning.
So now let's talk about what life-wide learning looks like in practice in the different phases of childhood. We'll start with early childhood. Beginning from the earliest years, simple additions to daily tasks can transform the learning experiences of children. For example, when a mother's cooking dinner and her children are around, she can begin teaching early math principles. For example, like counting. Maybe she and her children can count the potatoes that she's going to boil for dinner. She could also start teaching skills like sorting. She and her children can start sorting the beans that they'll be cleaning and cooking for dinner, maybe by size, maybe by shape, or by color. She can also start expanding her children's vocabulary by discussing where these vegetables came from. Who grew them? Who picked them? How did they come to be on our dinner table? Taking advantage of these everyday opportunities is so important because research has shown that the sheer volume, the amount of talk that caregivers engage in with their children, that's predictive of the vocabulary that those children themselves will develop. And it's predictive of their vocabularies in early childhood, but also later into their childhood years. Okay, so what does building parents' capacity to support learning at home look like? Well, it can take many different forms. You can create parenting groups where parents work together, train each other, and collaborate on the different types of learning activities they engage in their homes. You can also organize meetings or groups with local leaders or champions to share messages about early learning and development and how parents can support this in communities and at home. In addition, community health workers can be very powerful advocates for early learning. Community health workers are often deeply embedded in the communities that we live in already, and so in addition to sharing messages about strong nutrition and health, if they can also share messages about the importance of healthy brain development and early learning, they can share these messages with parents and young children across a wide variety of communities. In addition, we know parents can spend a lot of time either listening to the radio or maybe on their cell phones. So creating engaging content for a radio program or perhaps text message reminders about different daily activities that parents can engage in can be really useful. Finally, television could also be an option. We know that not all television shows are educational, but more and more we're seeing organizations think of creative content to create shows that are engaging for both parents and children to really drive home these early literacy and early math messages for young children. One other thing to mention is that these messages for parents about early learning can be very, very simple. So this is an example of an early literacy and math card from a Save the Children program for parents. And you can see here in the pictures and in the words depicted that the messages we're sharing with parents are about how early learning can be integrated into their day-to-day activities at home or in the community very easily. And we incorporate both text and pictorial representations of the different activities so that we can reach parents of all different education and literacy levels. So many groups globally are building strong evidence about the effectiveness of these different types of home-based or community-based early learning programs. There are nice examples of successful television programming in Tanzania and also interactive radio instruction in Zambia. The example we have here is from a parenting group program in Ethiopia. So it was a quasi-experimental study which looked at children's learning and development before any programming began and then again after the program had been running for some time. And the gray bars you see here are the baseline scores. So they represent children's learning and development before any programming had started. And then the orange bars are the gains or the change over time in children's development across 3 different groups. So the standard ECD group is a group of children who are attending ECD classes. They're classroom-based programs taught by a teacher. And then the ECD at home group were children whose parents are attending this group session that is promoting life-wide learning and parenting skills at home. And then the quality ECD and ECD at home group on the right side, these are children who are both attending an ECD class and whose parents are attending the sessions to learn about education at home. And you can see that children who attended the standard ECD classes and those who received education at home made pretty comparable gains over time. But the children who learned the most were those who were receiving both the classroom-based learning and whose parents were engaging with them in learning at home. So it's very important to say that these two spheres of education, with the classroom and the home, are very complementary. And children learn the most when they can get quality inputs from both places. It's also important to note from this slide that the children whose parents were attending the parenting program only, so the children who didn't have access to center-based ECD classes, their baseline scores were significantly lower than children in the other groups who had access to these ECD classes. And this is a trend that we're seeing across many countries, where children who are in communities that don't have access to ECD centers, or perhaps their parents can't pay the private fees if there are some private classes offered near them, they are the most in need of additional learning opportunities in order for them to develop the skills they need to transition into primary school successfully or with the same skills as their peers. So these kinds of life-wide learning programs and activities are the most important for these children who don't have access to any other kind of early learning opportunities. I should also say that while we have many examples of successful small-scale programs for life-wide learning in early childhood, there is very much a need to look at evidence and programs that work at scale. So what can work across whole communities or countries to promote life-wide learning in the early years? That's something that we still need to investigate further.
Middle childhood. In middle childhood, when children are in primary schools, establishing time each day for homework and creating a reading corner at home with materials are all opportunities for parents and caregivers to enhance their child's learning. But children also learn through a range of interactions at home and in the community. For example, children learn from reading with their families. Children learn when they read in pairs, in which one child might be more experienced and they'll benefit from growing in confidence, and the other child will benefit from learning the basics from them. Where parents cannot read, children learn when community groups can offer more children access to adults or young people to read with them in groups, whether more intimate, like the group in Ethiopia on the left, or in larger groups, like the group from Mozambique on the right. Of course, learning and meetings require books, and communities devise ingenious ways to deliver books to remote villages, or orchestrate after-school access to collections of books via partnerships with schools, communities, or civil society organisations. As with early childhood, content for these activities comes in many forms and can be adjusted to your programme, curriculum, and investment focus. Here are just two examples. The first, on the left, is a resource from Literacy Boost and was created by Save the Children and World Vision to promote life-wide learning. The second, on the right, is a flipbook for leading parenting workshops. There are many other examples in every country in the region, so we do encourage you to explore the space and the evidence around them to build effectively on what is already working. This is important because we know promoting a stronger culture of reading and discussion in and around the home during the primary school years supports greater learning. Community reading events, like those we've been discussing, such as reading in pairs, borrowing books, reading clubs, and participating in literacy celebrations, represent practice time for the child, as well as modelling the importance of literacy outside of school. In this research, these activities were implemented alongside teacher training in 5 sites in the region, and this figure shows a positive relationship between participating in the community literacy activities and gains in children's reading comprehension. One of the Rwandan sites was an RCT that tested the added value of including these types of community reading activities, finding greater gains for children who had quality opportunities to learn both inside schools and out in the community. And evidence from Malawi suggests that such investments can level the playing field, as the greatest gains in implementing this combination of inside and outside of school reading interventions were made by children in low literate households.
Early adolescence. In early adolescence, children continue to need the support of their caregivers and parents. Strategies for supporting the learning of secondary school and out-of-school young people in the region reflect the need to support academic progress, but also parent and caregiver roles in supporting social and emotional competencies alongside livelihoods. Linkages to employment opportunities and networks of local skilled tradespeople are also support that parents and caregivers can give to young people. A focus on positive youth development engages parents, caregivers, and community members to mobilize an enabling environment in which youth maximize assets, agency, access to services and opportunities, and promote their competence in avoiding risks, staying safe, and being protected. Save the Children and the Mastercard Foundation aimed at improving the socioeconomic status of 40,000 rural out-of-school boys and girls in Burkina Faso, Egypt, Ethiopia, Malawi, and Uganda. In this figure here, we have data from tracer studies in Ethiopia and Uganda that show how families and community mentors magnified the support that youth received from the program by providing additional material, emotional, and mentor support. There was also increased financial support that was hard to fit in the visual due to too many measurement scales. This support actively involved the relationships in the immediate community and offered the youth opportunity not only to learn but to establish the reputation for being hardworking and responsible. The program concluded that having more strategic and explicit involvement of the family in development programs for adolescents can determine not only how well the adolescents use the skills they have learned, but also the longer-term sustainability of the livelihoods that the adolescents select. The implication of greater support for life-wide learning is that ministries and donors alike should ensure their early childhood and education systems are no longer ignoring children's opportunities to learn outside of classrooms. Investments must include action points that assist parents and caregivers to support children's learning outside of institutions, be they preschools, primary schools, secondary schools, or non-formal settings. For example, in Rwanda, following the midterm review of the education sector plans, as well as other sector analyses in 2015 to 2016, there is now a stronger emphasis on the role of parents and community in learning. The Education Sector Strategic Plan 3 final draft emphasizes the engagement of parents and community. It includes an output on parenting education and sensitization under one of the strategic areas. The Rwanda ECD policy also includes a strategic focus on parenting education and commitment to roll out a national parenting program. The draft literacy policy of Rwanda also emphasizes the use of children's out of school time for activities such as participation in reading clubs. At school level, teachers have been trained on the role of parents in a specific module on the role of parents in the new competence-based curriculum teacher guide. At pre-service level, there is a module on the role of parents and parenting education in the pre-service curriculum. Save the Children Rwanda has also developed for the government of Rwanda a training for PTAs, commonly known as parent-teacher associations, which can be used to train parents on how to support children's learning. At coordination level, local leaders are expected to include sensitization of parents and parenting education in district plans, as well as their own performance contracts. Across the region, ministry staff at local levels have key roles to play in reaching parents and caregivers with messages about concrete, feasible options for promoting children's learning in daily life. And coordination with local civil society can expand their efficacy in promoting local solutions to barriers parents face in taking up their role supporting learning. Because there are many stakeholders, not internal to ministry systems, the planning efforts also need to bring together relevant actors from the national media, libraries, publishing industry, local civil society, and related government entities, including not only education, but the ministries of health, local government, social welfare, women and families. For older children, relevant actors may also include employers and skilled trades professionals with apprenticeship opportunities.